Blessed be everyone. Hello and welcome to another episode of Black Magic Talk. We are so excited because today we have Chris Travers. Is that how you
Mhm.
say it?
Yes, that's how you say it.
Okay. So excited. We are just going to interview him for about an hour. He's going to tell us all about himself. And then I'm not going to talk very much because I've been having sinus issues and this is not working out. So I'm going to ask a very few questions and then I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who's over here, Matt Collins, who is my co host. So good to see you, Matt. How was your week?
Good, good. How about yours? Besides being under the weather a
Well,
little.
besides being a little under the weather, it was good. I got to spend some time with my son. He was at his father's. He got to spend Father's Day with his father. So he was out of the house, but I was able to spend a little time with him. And right now he's with my mom, who is taking him swimming tomorrow. So I was like, geez, I wish I could go swimming.
That sounds
But
sweet.
yeah, I do like swimming, especially watching him swim and then being in there with him. So there's a lot going on there. I always loved the pool when I was younger. I just love swimming and going to the pool and stuff. But anyway, today we're going to talk to Chris. And so, Chris, introduce yourself, tell us about yourself, and then tell us how you got on your path.
Sure. So, I'm Chris Travers. I'm a master in the Rune Guild. I guess if I were to basically say a few other things, I'm very much into the idea that there's a lot of lost knowledge in, for example, practical crafts. Um, and so one of the things I do is I explore cooking different cuisines. I have a YouTube channel where I display some of that. But as far as how I got on my path, basically, when I was in high school, I sort of, basically exploring a bunch of alternative sort of religious approaches from sort of a lot of the New Age stuff. Explored Wicca, explored some other things, and basically at some point I came across a small little book called A Practical Guide to Runes by Lisa Peschel. And somehow that clicked with me, and then I managed to read just about everything Edward Thorson had written. That clicked with me some more. I started basically, I have a real deep love for history, so I basically did what I could to study everything I could myself. Eventually wrote The Serpent and the Eagle, which is sort of my effort at distilling what I've been able to come up with on in terms of like the historical and linguistic and cultural studies into something that's usable. Um, Working on some other projects now, including I have a book that I'm like partly through trying to write. I don't know if I will get it done at some point, but I'm hoping to. So I don't know if you've ever written something, you probably know how that goes. It was 9 years between. It was a kind of funny number, 9 in terms of running stuff. It was 9 years. It took 9 years between when I wrote the first draft and submitted it to when I self-published The Serpent and the Eagle. Anyway, so things can take a while.
And tell us, what
So
is the
that
serpent and the eagle? What is it? Is it like fantasy? Is it fiction,
no,
nonfiction?
it's the full title is The Serpent and the Eagle: An Introduction to the Elder Runic Tradition. It's an effort to kind of bring in create sort of a systemized framework for beginners to start to look into the lore surrounding the Elder Futhark. So the title comes from the serpent being the serpent that gnaws on the root of the of Laerith and Grimnismal, and the eagle being eagle at the top of the tree that has the falcon sitting between his eyes. So yeah, and then of course you have the squirrel that runs in between them, trading
Uh,
insults.
And that has to do with the ruins. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
Well, yeah.
how many years have you studied this actually?
Well,
Now,
let's see. Oh, I'd have to think about that. Probably 30.
okay, wow. So you're really immersed in it and really absorbed into this. Would you say that you have made it your mission to write these books? And is your newest project more about that ruins or like a sequel, so to speak?
So so on the first one, I mean, it's my path. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you mean by mission, but in terms of the other project, basically, um, what I'm trying to do is to take sort of more specialized topics and explore them. So things about like time and fate and stuff like that um, that are I don't know how to put it. Well, we have kind of, I think, one-dimensional views of them in sort of modern culture, but when we start to look at um, what we have in the traditional material, oftentimes we can see sort of deeper models emerge. So,
Have you ever divulged into or maybe want to talk about shifting? Because as we know, time as we know it, as humans know it, is all man made. The idea of time and space is endless. So, could maybe certain specific things with that time and space, could that be kind of what your new projects are going to specialize in?
yeah. So, okay. So one of the basic areas that I kind of want to focus on a little bit is the bits in Voluspa about the coming of the Norns. And the reason for this is that if you try to work with all of this in translation, what you'll typically find is that a lot of, it's virtually impossible to try to carry through all of the linguistic connections between different poems, including poems that are maybe slightly outside the Norse sphere, but closely related, for example, Old English. And it's virtually impossible to carry out in some of the implications of some of the specific wordings. So, so what I see as a sort of a traditional model is that um, it's relatively close to the Greek model that we're effectively given a lot of life, and that lot in life is limited in both length and it is limited in law. But what we do within that domain is pretty much up to us. So this is for example, when the Greeks talked about fate, they talked a lot about it being this sort of partition. You know, you get your piece of fate, right? And what you do with it is up to you. But if you step outside, you die. And I don't think it's that different. But one of the things that comes out of the Norse, the sort of the Norse models of the Norns, is that one of the things the Norns do is they speak fate. Okay, and this is directly analogous to general magical workings, and it is specifically referred to in such terms in Voluspa.
Now, can
So,
you explain a little more detail? How do you speak fate in your own words?
okay, so what I see going on in this passage is the Norns are basically said that they come in with effectively great knowledge, but that point of great knowledge is something which, in other contexts, tends to be referred to in particularly as magic workers, right? So, so then they come in, and then it basically says that they score staves. Or at least the first two score staves, Urith and Vithandi. and then all three of them speak fate. So to my mind, this is specifically verbal magic. This is a matter of entering into effectively a ritual framework, and then very likely a lot of the old magical stuff was involved heavy uses of poetics and things like that. And so basically you're talking about, in my view, probable magical poetry in that regard.
Okay. Well, I think I'm done. My voice is definitely done for the night. So go ahead, Matt. You have the floor.
Awesome. Well, I love how you write about the importance of being honest. I find that to be an important part of the practice too. And why? Well, could you talk a little bit about that? I guess.
So one thing I've noticed with a lot of people going through, okay, so a lot of people end up in alternative traditions because they typically are coming into this because of difficulties that they've had sometimes with the mainstream. And it's very easy for people to practice a fair degree of self-deception. And if you're not trying to be brutally honest, particularly with yourself and consequently with others, what will happen is that you can become fairly unmoored, if you will. And I have never seen that end well. So I think it's very important for people to be both honest with themselves and, especially with their mentors and et cetera. But it's also really important to recognize that there are limits to what we know, that as we learn more, we will discover more that we don't know, and to become comfortable with that. And I think a lot of that does start with honesty.
I do too. And then it's interesting that Odin's known pretty much for not breaking oaths, but then when it comes to the Norns, that kind of changes a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that the Norns break oaths per se. I'm not aware of any oaths the Norns make.
But set the Norns into play a little bit.
Right. Okay, so taking creation into a single unified framework is actually very difficult in Norse tradition. Because we have, for example, we have Gylfaginning, we have Voluspa, and we have some things discussed in Grimnismal, among other poems, and to a large extent they form very small fragments, right? The way I put this together is that the Norns come into the picture specifically after humans are created. That the tree that they dwell beneath is the tree of humans. I see the world tree as a human model, as much as it's a universal model. And trees, of course, aren't something which exists before the sacrifice of Ymir. I mean, we know that from. I mean, this is all. I mean, just keeping the Voluspa sort of fragment of creation consistent with itself. There are no green things before Ymir, and humans then are created out of trees, and then we talk about immediately the tree I know, the ash I know, but ash, of course, also being a kenning for warrior.
And then the serpent and the eagle, that would be, I probably mispronounce this, but I imagine Needhog, right? Who chews on liars and oath breakers.
Yep.
So what about Tyr and Fenrir? Might you talk a little bit about that?
So this is an interesting one. So the general consensus is that Tyr is probably closely related to Mitra in the Vedic tradition, sort of as the god of contracts. And we see here basically this idea of a broken contract. And that's how Tyr loses his hand, right? We also, Dumazil has also described connections to some material in Livy's history of Rome, relating to one-handed individual. I forget the specifics. I'd have to go back and look that up. The thing, though, one of the things that I see in this is there are some kind of, okay, so this is going to wander a little bit just from the traditional lore and sort of go into some of the survivals in modern times. One of the things that I've learned a little bit in terms of the way law currently works in Scandinavia is that contracts cannot be enforced beyond reasonable terms. Contracts in Scandinavia are defined totally differently from contracts in, say, American or English or continental European law. The way a contract is defined in Scandinavia is as a promise. There's no, hold on. What happened here? Oh, okay, I'm still here. I have no idea what happened there. I just suddenly said reload site, and it wasn't this one apparently. So basically, there's no requirement of reciprocity for contracts in Scandinavian law. So basically, the idea is contracts are promises within reason. So one of the things I could interpret this as is as something of a template for that. In order to survive, the gods have to do something, and this involves breaking a contract, and Tyr pays the price for it. I think you can see some ways in which that echoes, as I say, in current contract law in Scandinavia generally today.
And then you were talking about the importance of swords and horses to the warriors of Germanic culture. And I know swords were something that oaths were sworn on. Might you have something to say about that?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the swords, and then I can talk about horses after that. So it's very important, I think, here to get out of sort of the way in which we would think about swords just from looking at, say, Roman models. The thing you have to understand about this from a technical perspective is that Romans more or less made relatively cheap iron weapons. And this was because they needed to mass produce them for a very large army. Okay. Now, what was going on outside the Roman Empire is actually very interesting in this regard. If you look at the transition from the Bronze Age to the early Iron Age in Hallstatt, which I've been to Hallstatt, beautiful town, amazing museum. If you ever get a chance to go. One of the things we see is that for a couple of hundred years, smiths are basically trying to work with iron the way they worked with bronze, and it didn't work very well. The reason for this is when you make a bronze weapon, you want to differentially harden it. Basically, you repeatedly anneal and hammer the edges, and this breaks up the grains and the edges and turns it into a much harder metal there. But you still have a softer core. Getting this effect on iron is really difficult. You can't do it. You can't do it in the same way. And so it took a few hundred years, but after a while, Celtic smiths in Hallstatt had apparently discovered case hardening. And case hardening allows you basically have iron diffuse partially in through the steel in through the edges of the metal, and then they would typically forge them. The thing is, having talked with J. Arthur Luce on this a bit, case hardening has some real limitations, and this would have been, I'll get to that in just a moment, but the end result is that forging axes and spears then becomes relatively easy, but forging swords takes a very long time. So once case hardening had basically spread, and then spread from the Hallstatt culture out through the rest of the Celts and into the Germanic cultures, this basically meant that if you were going to make a sword, it was probably going to take a smith a month of work, and so there weren't very many of them. So the sword was basically a symbol of sovereignty because they were very few people who could effectively afford to own one. Now, as we get into the Germanic areas, one of the problems, as say J. Arthur Luce pointed out to me, is that if you're repeatedly working with differential carbon in your steel, it tends to spread throughout the iron pretty quickly. So making more advanced swords required other differential technologies coming in. He thinks a lot of it was differential phosphorus by the time it was certainly early pre-Viking Age. But again, this underscores the fact that these were highly engineered weapons, and they were highly expensive weapons. You weren't going to as a common warrior, you weren't going to have a sword. You were going to have a spear. Swords were, and then basically one of the things that precipitated the Viking era was in Scandinavia, they started discovering ways of actually making strong, flexible, hard steel that wasn't pattern welded. And so it was in Scandinavia that sort of the first homogeneous steel swords came from, and that dramatically lowered the costs again. And so that then spread downward a bit. And then that spread throughout the rest of Europe after the Viking Age. So there are a lot of sort of technical pieces in terms of why these were so expensive and why these were then associated with sovereignty and why these were so important, just simply because of the costs associated traditionally. And even when the costs started to come down a bit, they still retained a lot of that. For horses, I mean, the fact is, there are only really two ways to get around in Scandinavia. One is horses and one is ships, and they have very similar connections. The difference is that the horse is also very typically a companion.
And swords were so important that they would oftentimes be named even.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths surrounding that.
Yep.
So I think it's great too that you say that people should read through the runes before just jumping right into it and practicing it. Why might that be?
So there are okay. So let me go a little further and expand on that point first. What I actually suggest is starting with meditating on them and trying to understand the lore and so forth, and then using them in divination and reading them, and then starting to work with them in practice. And the reason for this is, so first of all, you have stuff in the tradition, like in Egil Saga, where you have errors in the runes causing problems for people. And this is part of our traditional lore. It is something to be concerned about. Things, I mean, intent is important, but we're also talking about symbols which have meanings across time, and we don't really want to end up in a situation where you say something that you don't really mean, and it has consequences that you don't expect. Um, so from my side, it's important to first kind of get to know the runes, and then it's important to be able to sort of engage in a dialogue with them through divination before you start to try to work with them more directly.
And so you've traveled pretty extensively, like Odin. How has that been able to help your cuisine?
So, okay, so there are a number of interesting points to this. Like, so in 2010, we left the U.S. and moved to Indonesia. I was there for a little over 4 years, and then we moved to Sweden for 2.5 years, and then Germany for a little over 5, and then back to Indonesia. So in terms of cuisine, obviously, you know, there's being exposed to a lot of different cultures, foods, etc. But you know, the cuisine also, you know, I want to just kind of emphasize one point in that, you know, as I said before, I think there's a lot of lost knowledge in terms of practical arts, and you know, everywhere I've lived has also taught me something about how people lived in the times of the sagas. Um, so, you know, I pick up foods from everywhere I live. You know, if you're into Celtic material, you probably know that that one of the ways that was discussed in Irish literature of determining the king was for somebody to chew a piece of raw pork flesh and then sleep on it and dream of. In Germany, they actually eat raw pork sandwiches. So you know, there is there are a lot of there's a lot of you know, so there's a lot of things there that, you know, just kind of, you know, tie into each other. I've learned a lot about, you know, sort of more traditional food preservation, both in Scandinavia and in Indonesia. And you know, some of these things actually do change the way you look at our interactions with things, including food and a lot of the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, how much of a culture shock was it initially?
A lot. So when I first moved to Indonesia, you know, it's funny, you know, you come in from a sort of an American arrogant perspective, and basically, you know, you see all this pollution and poverty and corruption, and eventually, after 2 years, I sort of realized that the difference was that you saw it here. It wasn't that it didn't exist back home. And really, it wasn't any worse here. It was just different. And because it was on display, oftentimes there was that itself tended to prevent certain abuses. So, you know, very, very, very tough transition for a few years. Then I ran into a transition that I had a much harder time with, which was the lack of seasons. And, you know, living in the tropics is great until you lose your sense of time. But yeah, it was a big culture shock. And then going to Scandinavia, I mean, people are like, wow, you came in the middle of winter to Sweden from Indonesia. How was that? It's like, you have weather, you have seasons. But you know, then figuring out how things work in Sweden and understanding the culture there, that I found that easier just because I had done that already. But it was, you know, it was definitely quite different. And then Germany was different as well. So
they're not all like the Swedish chef, like from the Muppets, like
no, they're not at all.
Do they even have a Swedish
I
meatball?
actually,
Or is that more like
yeah, there are Swedish
Americanized?
meatballs.
Oh,
No,
do they?
so no, I would find anytime I travel, because I traveled a lot for work. Anytime I was at hotels for breakfast, they would have meatballs there, and almost all the cafes would serve them. Basically, it's typically yeah. I mean, it is a sort of a major, almost national dish, but I haven't actually made it yet. It is on my list of dishes to do. So.
And
I know you. I'm sorry, Matt. One thing. I know you were talking about Germany. Do you have any? Because I'm half German. I have
Mhm.
a lot of German in my background. Um, I I I know for New Year's Day, a tradition here, a German thing to do is like sauerkraut and pork, or pork and sauerkraut as we call it. I'm more the tradition of like hot dogs and sauerkraut. Is there anything like sauerkraut dish that you would do?
So
I think Matt looked this up. Now, you have a strawberry cheesecake that looked very interesting. Do you like those kind of delicacies, or is it more like just the dishes themselves?
um, so I'm not sure the strawberry cheesecake. I'd have to.
It's
Um,
similar.
yeah. No, So let's see. I like a lot of different dishes, and I've tried to cook dishes that I find interesting, important, or that I really like very much, and usually they're all three.
Do you
So
have a favorite, or maybe a couple of favorites
from Germany
from anything,
or
really?
from Sweden, from anywhere. So you know, it's really hard for me to pick favorites, but there are a bunch of dishes that I think are totally unique, and I very much enjoy eating once in a while. And these include things ranging from durian to surströmming to um, some of the. I recently did this Lithuanian cheesecake that has jam in it. That was very nice.
You said the magic word, cheesecake.
Yeah, and
My
it's
favorite.
actually yeah. This one's actually done with ricotta. It's
Ah,
done with farmer's cheese normally. So it's
I
basically
love farmer's
paneer
cheese. I
similar,
love
but
farmer's
yeah.
cheese.
So it's good.
Excuse me. All right, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry. I was fascinated by the dishes. Now
no,
we're talking about
absolutely.
food, and I'm starting to get hungry too.
That's what I was going to say. Was just could you say the name of your YouTube channel so everyone could check it out?
Yeah, World Traveler Cooking.
Yeah, I think she was
World
talking
Traveler.
about the friendship cheesecake that you had just made the
Yes,
other
that
day.
was the Lithuanian one that I
Okay,
just
okay.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
a
it looked
it's a very nice.
delicious.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, we'll have all the links in the description for everyone to check out.
Sure. Thanks.
You bet.
Yeah.
So, what got you into cooking?
So when I was just a kid, we all had to cook dinner periodically. That was sort of part of our chores. And then when I was in college, it sort of became, a way of trying to impress people. Um, this, I mean, and then basically, once I basically in terms of then when I was in Germany, what I discovered was that it was actually really good career wise to periodically cook for random people in the office. And then COVID hit, and they said we couldn't cook in the office anymore. So I started doing YouTube stuff to try to connect with other folks at work, and that was where the YouTube channel came from. So that's sort of the evolution of the cooking side. Um, but I mean, it's interesting because you get to build contacts with everybody from somebody doing customer support to somebody who might be VP of HR to somebody who might even occasionally get the CTO in there. So you know it's a way to connect with people, and it's a way to then also connect to cultures and all the rest of that. So.
Yeah, you were talking about lost arts. How often do you get fans that maybe tell you about different recipes or the way they cook stuff? Or
I do periodically, yeah. There are a few that actually come back to frequently and suggest different foods. Like, I have one there that's poisson cru, which is Tahitian raw fish marinated in lime and stuff. And that was specifically brought up by a fan. That's quite a delicious dish. It's not too different from. I mean, it kind of resembles ceviche in some ways, but ceviche tends to be like with tomatoes and stuff, and this is typically with coconut milk and cucumbers and some other things. So.
Have you ever made mead or any alcoholic drinks? Yeah.
Yeah. I used to, when I was in college, I used to do a lot of homebrewing, did a lot of mead. Before moving to Indonesia, I did a bunch of mead and beer. I actually got into like the early beer styles. So like this, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but what we think of as beer is very much a 19th century creation. Before the 19th century, it was only very highly specialized beers that were carbonated. And this was because maintaining carbonated beer is at scale is actually relatively difficult. So people were actually creating what we call still beers, and these are actually very interesting, and they don't taste at all like flat beer. They have a much lighter, livelier flavor, and I got really into doing those for a while. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, because I know in Europe they don't keep it in the refrigerator.
No, but it's still carbonated. I mean, the thing is that what made the difference for making carbonation possible on a mass scale was industrial bottling and bottle caps and all the rest of the stuff. Otherwise, you're basically left with a champagne cork in every beer bottle.
It's true. I didn't even think about that.
So it's but they also didn't used to only use hops, right? Hops is very much itself as a primary beer ingredient, a product largely of Protestantism and the Reformation. This was an effort at depriving monasteries of papal monopolies on gruit mixes, which themselves probably went back before the conversion, etc., because people put all kinds of stuff in their beer, all kinds of things from up through and including henbane seeds. So,
what's the most interesting kind of food or alcohol that you've tried traveling?
Most interesting food or alcohol? Okay, so most interesting food, I would actually say, when I was in Sweden, I was working in Denmark, and one of my Swedish friends invited me over to have surströmming with him. If you're not, I'm sure some of your folks watching are not familiar with surströmming. Surströmming is a fermented herring. It's salted enough that you don't get bad bacteria growing, and then basically it's just allowed to ferment. And the fermentation starts with digestive enzymes from the herring itself, but then eventually it's they're bacteria that continue to produce. It breaks down different components of the herring into. That was a very interesting experience. It's not something you can eat straight because it's very salty and it's very strong. But when you eat it in sort of the traditional way with lots of sour cream and cheese and bread and potatoes, it's actually really delicious. And that was something that also kind of reminded me how much we've forgotten how to preserve food in the absence of things like refrigeration.
Absolutely. I remember talking to my grandparents and great grandparents about, eating rabbits and squirrels during the Great Depression. And It's amazing how much things have changed. That people take
Well,
for granted.
I mean, I bought rabbit meat in the supermarket in Germany. Quite delicious.
I'm sorry. Is it?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, do they make Swedish meatballs out of horse?
So they don't eat a lot of horse meat in Sweden, although I think you could definitely make them out of horse meat. I have seen people make them out of reindeer meat.
Yeah, because horse was a special thing to eat in the sagas. Yeah, for people who don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely be possible. Like in Germany, they still eat a fair bit of horse in certain contexts, or I wouldn't say fair bit, but it's still quite possible to get horse meat at markets and so forth in Germany. In Sweden, I've never seen it. I don't know if it's related to the conversion. I don't know if it's. I've never tried to track that difference down, but in Italy, sometimes they eat it too.
Yeah, because my favorite's elk and bison, personally. Have you cooked those ever?
Yes, I have. Of course, what you call elk, we don't have. There is pretty much a North American animal only. Bison, there are similar ones in Europe also. What they call an elk in Europe is what you call a moose. So it's elk in Swedish, but that means the same animal as we refer to in American English as a moose, and that's really delicious too.
How about deer meat? Just regular deer meat.
Yeah, sure, that's good.
I love it.
It's interesting because like North American deer meat and European deer meat actually taste quite different. I don't know if it's a difference in diet or whatever, but there's a massive difference in flavor.
And what's the difference?
American deer meat is much more gamey. It has a much stronger game flavor. European deer meat, it can have a little bit of gaminess, but it like the big way you differentiate it from beef is that beef actually has sort of this beefy sweetness to it that is completely missing in deer meat. You see a similar difference between lamb and goat, by the way.
You can still get protein from that though, right? Because I love deer jerky all the time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can get protein from any of it. I mean, the only thing you have to, I mean, deer's not lean enough to worry about like making sure you get enough fat with it. Rabbit is, by the way. You have to get enough fat when you're eating rabbit, or else you can't get the protein out of it. There have been people who have starved to death by in times like depression and war and stuff by eating mostly rabbit.
I had no idea. That's wild.
Yeah, look up rabbit starvation. It's
interesting.
Yeah.
What dishes do you have planned soon for your YouTube channel, or do you know yet?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, so I have some that I just recently recorded, some French dishes. I did a soupe au pistou, which basically it's like in American English terms, I'd call it basically a pesto soup. It's really, really good. I did one with pork belly and a little bit of pork belly, and then like zucchini and beans and onions and leeks and potatoes and so forth. It was really good. And then I'm going to do the Swedish banana pizza for the 800 subscriber mark. This is sort of the national pizza of Sweden. It's a pizza with typically ham or chicken, curry powder, and bananas on it.
Bananas on pizza. I never even thought of that.
Yep. Yeah. And then I have a few others, which I'm probably spacing. I'm going to do a Swedish cardamom ice cream. Trying to think of others. Yeah, I have a whole list, but Yeah, for the 800 subscriber mark, it's going to be Scandinavian pizzas. So it'll be the Swedish banana pizza, and then sort of the more widely eaten beef béarnaise pizza.
And what exactly is that? Can you explain?
So it's a pizza with slices of beef and béarnaise sauce. Of course, you add the béarnaise sauce after it's cooked, because otherwise it would kind of turn into scrambled eggs and stuff. But it's yeah, that one's probably less weird to people's ideas of what pizza could be. But yeah, those two I've seen quite a lot around both Denmark and Sweden, less so in Norway.
How do you feel about pineapple on pizza, since it's such a controversial topic in some circles?
Well, so for pineapple on pizza, I mean, I think you have to understand, like, Italians will complain about pineapple on pizza, but they will put strawberries or blueberries in savory risottos. The reason for this, I think, is actually that Italian food is very, very much focused on local ingredients, and people don't grow pineapples in Italy. I've had some pineapple pizzas in Sweden that were just delicious. Pineapple and prawn is an amazing combination. But it's it's something that I think I think it's one of those things where I think it's controversial because Americans have this very different idea of what Italian food is than Italians do, and that leads to that leads to, I think, some general hard feelings all around, and then it really surfaces when it comes to the pineapples on pizza.
Yeah, I think guacamole is the #1 topic in California for pizza.
No,
which I actually like it.
Yeah,
but I think that makes sense for it being local.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as I say, it's like Italian food itself. I mean, as I say, there are a few complaints that Italians have with Italian American food. One of the big ones is Americans overuse spices in seasonings. And what that means to my mind is that there is just a difference. I mean, Italian and Italian American cuisine are just different. They're, it's better if we don't pretend that they're the same. Then we can let each one be its own, and then we can all be happy together.
Yeah, because pizza's not even Italian, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I mean, you have flatbreads with stuff on it a lot of different places in the world, right? And so, you have Flammkuchen, for example, in the Alsatia and in Germany, for example, which is kind of similar, but different kinds of toppings, right? So what we call pizza tends to be like, or what they call pizza in Italy tends to be a very specific flatbread. Typically, you'll have Napoli and Rome style pizzas, and those will be slightly different. But as I say, it's pretty obvious for people to take some dough and stretch it thin and put stuff on it and bake it. So yeah. So you do see flatbreads with stuff on them a lot of different places.
Yeah, true. Pita is very, very popular in Greece.
Yeah. 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 So
I guess then we should say, like, I have some chicken Alfredo in the refrigerator, but we only make it with noodles and chicken. You can stick broccoli in it, but so I should not even associate that with Italian cooking.
Yeah. So an American Alfredo sauce is actually much more closely related to British versions of French cuisine. And I don't mean this at all as an insult. I mean, the thing is that people have this very stereotypical view of British cuisine, and that's totally, in my view, undeserved. British cuisine uses more spices than any other European cuisine that I've looked at. But basically, what you have here is you have something that's basically it's a bechamel sauce with cheese in it, typically garlic, and and then you put in whatever you want to put in it. The closest thing to an Alfredo sauce in an Alfredo pasta in Italy was, the original Alfredo was what they called al burro, which is basically it's a sauce made entirely from butter and Parmesan Reggiano cheese. So there's no cream, no, it's not thickened with flour. It's just those two ingredients. And so this is, as I say, it's an Italian American dish, and it has a lot of impact. It has a lot of influence from British and French cuisine.
But now because they don't they don't lighten it up a bit, so it's not as creamy. So is it a little more thicker in Italian?
Yeah, it'll be a bit saltier, a lot richer.
Okay. A lot richer. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say Thai food got very popular in America, which actually led to us having to import ingredients from Thailand.
Yeah.
Have you found any difficulty finding any particular ingredients anywhere? Or?
Oh yeah, I do frequently have to substitute things. Like I couldn't find salt pork for the soupa al pisto, and so I ended up just having to use fresh pork belly, which is fine. Sometimes I can find Western celery. Sometimes I can't. For the mussels and fries, I couldn't find the Western celery quickly, so I got the Indonesian celery, which is somewhat different. I made haggis recently, and obviously I couldn't get any of the sheep organs, so I substituted goat, and that was really good. I do have trouble getting some things. It's not as bad as you'd expect because Indonesia has this. There's a company called Tokopedia, which basically is a venue for online vendors, and people sell all kinds of things on Tokopedia. So I've even found some recent cheesemakers that I'm starting to get into that do like French style blue cheeses and stuff like that. So.
I know when I go on vacation, it always seems like things taste better. Do you think that's just the nostalgia and the vacation, or do you think things are different tasting in different places?
They are different tasting in different places. So one thing that I cannot get here that really does annoy me are really good like the sort of vine ripened tomatoes, and the reason I can't get them here is because it's too hot for them to properly ripen on the vine. There are things do taste different in different places.
Yeah, I know we can't get huckleberry here, which is my favorite, so we have to import it from Montana, but it's kind of hard because things melt if I get a chocolate bar, for example, with huckleberry.
Yeah.
What's your favorite kind of mead that you've made, or what's the base for it?
My favorite mead. So this is going to sound really weird, but it's so what I did was I found a black oak, and I gathered a number of acorns, probably about I put in I think about one acorn per gallon of mead, and I roasted them first, and that was really good.
What I'm sorry. Go ahead.
When you roast black oak acorns, they develop. There's both a bitterness and a heavy vanilla flavor. That's really hard to beat. You can, in fact, eat them in small quantities. Just don't eat them in bulk. But
that's what I was going to ask. The flavor.
Yeah.
Now, how come you can't eat too many?
So you have a lot of tannic acid in them that'll upset your stomach, and then you have a lot of gallic acid that is not so great. You can eat a few of them without any problem.
Well,
They're really tasty when they're roasted. I mean, like really tasty. But they're also a fair bit bitter, so you won't want to eat very many of them anyway. So
we're coming up on the last few minutes here. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
not really. Yeah, I think we had a pretty good survey of a lot of things. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and then all the links will be in the description for World Traveler Cooking. So
Yep.
you guys got to go check that out and get hungry from watching that.
Yeah, I
good
know.
stuff.
I'm just about to go out there and eat like a snack or something. Well, that is our show for today. I'd like to thank our guest, Chris. It was very wonderful talking to you. And like I said, you made me hungry now.
Awesome.
So yeah. And where can we can find your recipes on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I always put the recipe in the video description.
Okay. So again, all that will be down in the description field. If you do want to try some of Chris's dishes, I would recommend them. I'm definitely going to try to make that friendship cheesecake because I love cheesecake. It's my weakness. I can't help it. I need the cheesecake all the time. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing that because I love baking. Love baking. It's like in my genes for and then I'm also a good cook as well because I mean anyone can follow a recipe, right? As long as you have the ingredients to do it. And we always had a saying, if you went to my great grandmother's house and you left there hungry, that was because that was your fault because my grandmother would feed you.
Oh yeah.
So if everyone would like to check Chris out, all of his links will be in the description field. And again, would like to thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for coming and allowing us to interview you. Who do we have next week, Matt?
Next week, we've got Michael Kelly.
Michael Kelly.
Ooh, nice.
And what is his claim to fame?
He is big into dragons and runes himself.
Awesome. Dragons and runes. Just one more question for you. Why runes, Chris? Why did you get interested in the first place? And do you do readings?
I do reading sometimes. Yeah. Again, it was one of those things as I was exploring. I came across some books, and it just kind of clicked. It was just suddenly became clear it was my path. So.
Okay. Well, if you would like a reading or you would like to learn all about Chris, again, in the description field. Otherwise, that's it for us. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend and blessed be everybody.